So how is one to establish cause and effect with a number of contributing variables? In some cases, like Chernobyl, the exposure is so high that it is easy to draw a clear connection between getting a disease or dying and the exposure itself. However, in the case of low-level radiation exposure, this simply may not be possible. I looked at reported cancer incidence rates for Great Britain from 1975 to 2010 from Cancer Research UK website, and it shows about a 1/3 increase over this period of about 35 years. But as their website points out, there are many known causes of cancer. Lifestyle, industry and genetic are three obvious ones, and one finds a cumulative effect occurring where the statistical chance increases with the combination of, say, smoking, air pollution, repeated UV burning and certain genetic predispositions. So radiation may contribute to the cause of a disease without actually causing it. But also note the terms in which the calculation is put, statistical chance. This means that we recognise some kind of causal connection occurs, but because there are so many variables involved which cannot be isolated, the best we can manage is a probability prediction based on large-scale datasets. In short, the scientific method of reduction allows us to create the problem, but is ineffectual in allowing us to properly understand or predict below statistically significant mass effects. So the fact that some people's biology is very highly susceptible to radiation is largely lost in the data of those who are not. And so the risk to a particular individual cannot and will not be available. Unfortunately, all of this is used by the industry to maintain the idea that nuclear is a safe and clean source of power, even to the point that the Japanese Fukushima nuclear catastrophe can be called a wake-up call to invest more in nuclear power, because no one has yet died as a result of the biggest known radiological release in history. Therefore it must be pretty safe. The more I look into the nuclear industry, the more I see a facade for the nuclear weapons industry. Because public opinion can and does matter, if a large enough proportion of the population feel their own future and the future of their children is seriously threatened, there would be no more nukes. We would get rid of them. So good PR is essential, first and foremost, to cast doubt upon the validity of health findings, the scope and applicability, which is not terribly difficult to do because of the problems above mentioned when dealing with the effects of particularly low levels of ionizing radiation, because its causational effects can be difficult to establish in the real environment and they may take many years to appear. If you watch clips from the March-April 2011 Fukushima news interviews, I think you'll see what I mean. The industry spokespersons all tend to play down any dangers related to tons of irradiated material spewing into the air and sea and try to counter with the accusation that to say anything else is scaremongering, while the other side tries to point out that to willfully allow the exposures of millions to a potential fatal substance is criminal and deplorable. But it does not really help us settle the matter or move us forward in any way. So, to power and control. The military and governments tend to like nuclear, so the reality seems to be that it is here to stay, regardless of the health dangers or the war dangers, or that many old nuclear power stations around the world seem to be ticking time bombs owned by companies that will keep raising dividends while maintenance and improvements are depressed. And the worst part is who pays when things go inevitably wrong. It's always the people in the environment. It is the insane business model of the world economic GDP that can only see such calamities as good for business, and that predicts the demise and possible extinction of mankind. The fact that companies routinely get away with the worst crimes committed in the modern age with little more than a fine is not easily explicable, even when one considers that GDP economic measures rate such disasters as a positive boost to the economy. since they do so much real harm, and it would seem insane to think that transaction numbers on a computer screen could be of more importance than the welfare and well-being of people and other living creatures, unless, as I mentioned earlier, one considers that the prevailing business mindset that our environment is of no regard beyond what can be dragged out or thrown into it, having no real connection with us. Come to think of it, it still seems insane. In fact, it is insane. But perhaps what is driving this insanity is more to do with the grasping for power and control. I think at base it's always about power and control. The evolutionary development of the neocortex in man has been about exercising greater conscious power and control. Throughout history, man has sought to control his environment and himself. He developed ideologies and religions as a paradigm to exercise power and control in a particular form and direction. Finally, we struck upon science, the empirical testing of reductive models of real phenomena. We gained enormous knowledge from this idea and this paradigm. It is the power of the modern world and what has shaped the modern world. However, we do not seem to have been so quick to develop methods of acquiring wisdom. This I see as the control aspect, and essential for the use of power, because power without adequate control results in chaos. I am reminded of the fool in King Lear saying one ought to be wise before one was old. I believe this is what we find in the world today. We have become old before we were wise, and therefore we do not need any more fancy technology right now. We need to learn how to use what we already have. That is perhaps too harsh an analysis. In fact, new technology seems to me to be something that is required for dealing with the nuclear problem, given the likelihood that we cannot shut it all down, such as developing ways to remove radiological particles from the environment, the waste produced, and developing spacefaring technologies, which was also something that struck me as an interesting aside, because of the additional radiation in the environment. Presumably future generations surviving long enough will no doubt gradually develop some level of resistance to it, which could be very useful for exploring space due to the high levels of radiation that astronauts will get exposed to, even if they have quite good shielding. Nonetheless, I feel extremely weary by the horrendous problems that mankind has created for itself, and a lack of power I have to properly address them all. Or even some. I mean, the plot is just so repetitive and dull. It is only about what the individual can screw out of everyone else for their own myopically tiny interests. The system of governments are about serving the personal interests of those who could influence everyone into believing that they are more important than everyone else, or they and their interests are more important than everyone else. Generally, this is all politics is about, and requires a total disregard of what actually matters. Meanwhile, the vulnerable and the voiceless remain just that, unnoticed, kicked into filth and squalor, until some budding journalist comes along and makes yet another powerful documentary on the ills of the modern world and how terribly badly treated this or that other is. And everyone, with or without a cause, can shout and scream until the jerks that are supposedly representing everybody condescend to some meaningless concession, and everyone can feel self-satisfied with their amazing achievement. Well, I'm going to tell you now that I don't really want any kind of part of that fatuous, fake nonsense. I think that religious people got one thing right, and that is the most important aspect of life, is the choices we make, because it is about who we are and who we want to be. And I'm not the sort of person who can settle for any kind of deal with such a retrograde, disreputable and untrustworthy authority that claims to be responsible but has no heart, honour or wisdom. I do not want to be trapped in a system like that, and I won't be trapped in it. When I speak a change, i.e. you're going to have to shut down all this nuclear crap, I expect things to change. I don't expect to have to spend the rest of my life arguing over some tedious academic detail with soulless authorities while people are harmed, suffer and die. So on this issue of nuclear annihilation, I am paradoxically horrified and also cheered. horrified for the obvious reasons. I love this planet. I love the amazing natural life, and I hate to see it so despicably treated. But I'm cheered because until we have a society that really cares about the world and is wise, my attitude is good riddance to mankind. It's clearly a case that you're doing the right thing by getting rid of yourself. Your current strategy and your current way of dealing with everything is just too dangerous and irresponsible to exist like it is. It's just a shame you're going to take so many innocent and harmless creatures with you.
Professor, without knowing precisely what the danger is, would you say it's time for our viewers to crack each other's heads open and feast on the goo inside?
Yes, I would, Kent.